Hello, and welcome to Raider HQ After Dark. I'm your host, Raider, and I'm bringing you a video today about the VA claims process from the Raider's perspective. And I will be focusing a lot more on this type of video. I know I have put out a few videos based upon the changes to the manual reference, to which I'm sure you're bored to tears with. But I will be talking about, incorporating how the process works from my perspective. So that way maybe it can, connect a few dots that might have been missing. Now, I know that a few, content creators out there, they put out videos, and I'm just going to tell you that a lot of the time, the majority of those videos do not mirror the reality of what the internal VA process looks like. So I thought I'd start this journey by going with something that's actually really easy, so I can cut my teeth on it, and it establishes a good foundation to work off to build from. So today we're going to be talking about the elements needed in order to grant service connection. So let me share this screen. So there are actually three elements that are needed in order to grant service connection. So element one, element two, and element three. I'll go through each one of them in detail. They primarily stay somewhat the same, though two of them can change depending on the theory of service connection that's being discussed or applied. And I'll make a future video about the theories of service connection and kind of break down not only what each of them are, but also like what evidence is needed in order to be granted. So I'm going to start out with element one, and that is the current diagnosis and or symptoms. Okay, so in order to get your claim service connected, you must have initially a current symptom, and by the end of the process, you must have a current diagnosis. If you don't have a current diagnosis, then we can't actually grant. So, pardon me. And then, so this essentially is the manual reference for element one. You can go ahead and look this up. Competent lay medical evidence is needed in order to actually satisfy this criteria. So if you were to put, while claiming a condition, if you put knee pain, and I'm going to use knee throughout all of these examples, but if you were to say knee pain, then that would count as what a competent lay statement from the veteran would be. So you're a subject matter expert on whether or not you have pain, stiffness, any kind of descriptive term like that. Now, what does not satisfy element one is if you only put something like, I have a knee condition, because it doesn't actually tell us what the disability is or what a symptom is. It doesn't count. So a lot of the time, I deny people, my hand is forced, because I have to actually say that there is no element one to get an exam because, you know, a condition doesn't satisfy this element. And in order to move forward in the claims process, you have to satisfy this element. So how you claim things is very, very, very important in the total, spectrum of getting your condition service connected. Now, it's not a guarantee that you'll get service connected, but it will help. Now, generally, in order to additionally satisfy element one, you have to have a diagnosis, treatment, and or symptoms within the last year. Now, there are some exceptions to this in cases of disabilities that are identified as chronic, and those are listed under 38 CFR 3.309A. So if you have one of those conditions that are diagnosed, then the VA considers once you have that condition on that list diagnosed one time, it's diagnosed forever. So there's no need to continue to show that you have a chronic disability for that specific category of conditions only. And that pretty much summarizes element one for the most part. There are some outliers and things like that, but for this initial review, this does a lot of the heavy lifting in order to educate you in terms of what you would need in order to satisfy element one at the onset of your claim. Now, the other element element 2. Now, this one's a little bit more tricky because element 2 can actually change depending on what type of theory you're applying. So I'm just going to keep this simple and go back to the knee. So, like this explains, for direct service connection, you would need to show an event, injury, or disease in service in order to anchor the the disease itself to service. So if you said that it happened before service or after service, then element 2 would not be satisfied for a direct theory of service connection. Now, typically, element 2 is satisfied by medical records that the military produces, and or sometimes it can be in terms of like secondary conditions, the fact that the thing you're saying is the primary condition is service connected. But there are also some outliers here for MOS duties. So things that are not explicitly found in your records that you can utilize in order to satisfy element 2 in order for us to grant. So this would be, if you were a load master, let's say, that was your MOS in the Air Force, and you could show that, you lifted heavy things as literally the mainstay of your job, then that would be compelling evidence in order to satisfy element 2 in an event that you were lacking, say, treatment records or any kind of, complaints in service. And that's primarily what element 2 has to do with something that links it to service or service connection. And this is very, very important because a lot of the times element 2 is the hardest thing to overcome. Because if you never went to sick call, it is hard to make that, to rewrite history, I guess is the best way to put it. So just keep that in mind that when you do this, it is best practice, probably I should say, it is best practice to, if you have a specific event, that you be as descriptive as humanly possible. So that way the VSRs and the raters can find that evidence in order to check the box. Or at the minimum, give that evidence to the examiner so that way they have a more complete picture when they're reviewing your claim. Now, the third element, this is harder to explain because there are actually two separate reviews that happen during almost every single claim. So there's a review that happens for whether or not you should warrant an exam, which is the first review. And during that review, element 3 is considered like if you made a statement of, I've had knee pain since my injury in service. That would be a chronicity statement. And element 3 deals mostly with chronicity during this review in order to justify and warrant you getting an exam. So it doesn't require much at the initial onset in order to try to get an exam. You just have to be declarative in the fact that, it's not since you went water skiing 2 weeks ago, it's actually the injury that you have is related to service, and this is what my treatment looked like from service until now. And that's going to be true for you. So whatever that looks like. So that's element 3 during the first phase of the claim. Now, there's a second review that happens after you've had your exam, okay? And this has to do with the medical opinion that has been given by the examiner. So there are exceptions to this, in cases where you have a presumptive condition, no medical opinion is required, obviously. But in instances where a medical opinion is required based upon the theory of service connection, then element 3 must be satisfied by a medical opinion with a sufficient rationale. So you can have it to where you provide a very credible lay statement about the nexus between, your service injury and now, and then the examiner looks at it and they do their medical review, and then they come back with an unfavorable medical opinion. So you would have been denied in that case for element 3, even though you satisfied the first phase and you didn't pass the second phase. So this is sometimes out of your hands because it's literally a medical opinion, provided by the examiner. But it's important to know this because there are times whenever the examiner has all the power to determine whether or not you're service connected. And this is the lion's share of the time that the examiner is the one who decided whether you were or were not service connected. Now, there are other instances in which the rater can decide. So, one specific instance is when you have, say, you're going for IU, individual unemployability. That determination is 95% done by the rater themselves. So that is their interpretation of how all the examination and all the evidence that's given. That's up to the rater. Now, in a lot of content creators, they bash raters pretty hard and say, well, the rater just didn't want to grant me. Well, unfortunately, I wish I had that power, but 90% of the time, 95% of the time, it's the medical examiners who control that authority as to whether or not they provide a good rationale for whether or not you are or are not service connected. So this is important because if you're going to do a successful appeal and you're denied on element 3, the person you have to impress will almost always be the medical examiner. So please keep that in mind, because if you're focusing your attention at the rater and you're doing higher level reviews and whatnot, that's probably not going to change the outcome of the rating decision unless laws and regulations were not accurately applied for a higher level review. And I'll talk about higher level reviews in another video in the future, because I plan on doing quite a few videos just kind of explaining the process, for the ones of people who are watching my videos. If you want to see something, if you want me to explain something, just go ahead and ask in the comments, and I'll make a video for you if you really do want to understand some specific aspect. Now, my next videos, I think the next one I'm going to do is about the theories of service connection. I'll do a video for every single theory, and there are quite a few that you could potentially get service connected. Now, and I'm also going to be doing a video about specifically how your claim is processed, who touches it, how often they touch it, where it goes after they touch it, all the different phases of the claims process. But I just haven't had the time, so I'll be doing that in the future. So once again, if you watch this and you watched it to the end, I mean, you have saintly patience, and I appreciate that. And I'll I guess thank you once again, and have a wonderful day. Raider out.